Brenda. All right, we are recording. Welcome to our session on CQM Infrastructure for the Texas Department of State Health Services and the administrative agencies funded for Part B. I'm Michael Hager. I'm a consultant that has been hired to provide technical assistance alongside our friends at Germain Solutions for CQM. And I'd like to just turn it over really quickly to see if there are any words of welcome by any of our state partners. And you may be muted.
Hi guys, sorry I was drawing a blank on how to unmute myself after all these Zoom meetings I've been on. So anyway, it's a Monday for me. Good morning, welcome so much. Thank you for joining us today. I'm super excited about session 2 of our 4-part learning series with Michael and Jamie, and Jasmine's not going to be here today. So today we're going to have Jamie. She's also awesome. I hope you guys enjoy the session this morning. Janina or Brian or Rhonda, would any of you like to say anything this morning?
Good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone this Monday morning. It's good to see you all, all of you. And I'm excited about listening to this other presentation about CQM. I hope you are as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And as we've noted, I have a partner in crime today, Jamie Shank, who is working with me to tag team today's presentation. There's nothing more dull than sitting and listening to the same person drone on for 2 hours. So we're hoping that this is going to be a fun and educational back and forth for you. Oops, today is December 14th. Sorry about that, but the topic is correct and my co-host is correct. We're going to be talking about CQM infrastructure. Just a couple of helpful hints. I'm sure that you have used Zoom before, but for those of you who haven't, you can hit escape to exit your full screen and to look at other things on your desktop. You can hover over the top of the pictures to change the view options. You can get rid of the pictures, you can have more pictures or less pictures, whatever ends up adding the most value to your experience. We recommend that you put yourselves on mute until you're ready to pose a question or make a comment. And of course, if there's any unwanted or unintended, I should say, outbursts, we'll go ahead and just mute your line. And we'll be able to tell you to unmute if we can see your lips moving but don't hear anything. A quick hotkey, you can do Alt-A to mute, unmute. And of course, if as we're going along, you don't want to unmute your line, but you have some reactions or comments, please do use that chat room. It's really helpful for us to have a sense of the conversation as we work our way through. The meeting will be recorded and available for sharing afterwards. If you attended the first one, you should have received the link to the YouTube and also the toolkit. And as I'd mentioned before we started recording, but I'll mention again now that we are recording, there is a toolkit for this webinar as well, and we'll be circulating that following the presentation. And I can see a bunch of folks already entering their name and where they're hailing from in the chat room. That's also very helpful for those of you who may not know all of each other. Then it's a way to associate the name with the face. So that's always very helpful too. So we have a tall order for our 2-hour session today. For our learning objectives, we'd like for you to walk away being able to name the 2 components of CQM infrastructure. In addition, we'd like for you to be able to list the primary components of a comprehensive CQM plan, because that's really one of the important components of CQM infrastructure, and we want to make sure that you have a good sense of what goes into that. Explaining how to use attachments that complement CQM plans in a way that helps to keep them concise and manageable, and in a way that helps you to keep them compartmentalized so that we don't end up with this huge document that is unmanageable or unwieldy for people. We want you to walk away from today being able to describe the importance of a variety of stakeholders' involvement in CQM planning, implementation, and evaluation as drivers of your CQM program. And last but not least, your specific and special role as an administrative agency and how that is on 2 levels related to CQM infrastructure. I think that by exploring it at these 2 levels might help you to understand a little bit of how you can help folks in the field to really be the best they can in terms of implementing their home quality programs. So one of the most important things to note before we get started is that there's high variability in the administrative agencies, and that when we're talking about something, we're going to be trying to apply it to all types of administrative agencies. But if it doesn't sound like what we're saying makes sense to you, we want you to push back on us and to ask questions, raise your hands, shout out a question by an unmuted line, or whatever it takes. There's 5 cities that make up 5 of the administrative agencies, and then there are 2 that aren't really tied to cities. And that alone create 2 major types of ways that we think about our administrative agencies and how we work with the people that are funded in our field. So we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that right out the gate in terms of thinking about how you're going to be doing your job as it relates to CQM. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie, who's going to walk us through the CQM plans portion of our presentation. Jamie?
Yep, thanks, Michael. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. And as we are diving into the conversation about CQM infrastructure, the CQM plans is one of those important pieces, right? So we're excited to talk about the 2 main components of infrastructure, the plans and the CQM committee. So something to keep in mind is that your CQM plan, that is your document that really governs your activities, and that's sort of the driving force. So, agencies may have an institutional policy about CQM that point back to the plan or point back to certain leadership or staffing positions and how they support your clinical quality management, your CQM activities. But again, the plans are where everything is addressed, and that's really the driving force. So at the AA level, CQM plans address the many different provider groups and the different services that are provided in the service area. And at the AA level, CQM plans are HIV specific, and they must include the minimum expected characteristics that are mandated by the statewide program. At the provider level, the CQM plan addresses the systematic delivery of care that's at the client level. So at the provider level, these kind of plans they're not necessarily HIV specific, because HIV care is typically only a small part of the overall care that the provider organization does. However, even at the provider level, these CQM plans still must include the expected characteristics that are mandated by your AA as the agent of the state. And I think actually we'll turn it over for a quick poll on the next slide, a little bit about those plans. Michael?
All right, thanks for getting us started with that overview, Jamie. And just to get us going, we want to ask you a couple of questions. 1, do you have a CQM plan that encompasses all the Part B funded activities in your region? And 2, does your regional CQM plan include any language, process, or content that makes it cross parts? And then 3, do all of the Part B funded providers in your region have their own CQM plans? So we're just going to wait a couple of moments. We have 36 of you on the line. We're going to see if we can get up to around 25. So keep those votes coming in. Let us know what your level of experience is with these issues and how CQM planning is done in your region. Vote, vote, vote. Let us know. And I'm not sure is there for a reason. Feel free to use it. It is okay to not be sure. That's why we're training. Oh, 3 more. I'm at 22. 2 more, 23. Come on, you can do it. 1 more, you can do it. Fabulous. Thank you so much. All right, well, let's take a look at our level of comfort. So 64% of you say that there is a CQM plan that encompasses all the Part B funded activities in your region, but there are 9 of you that aren't quite sure. And I think that that's okay. As we'll hear, we're looking to make sure that all of our AAs or regions have a CQM plan that will encompass the Part B funded activities in our region? 2, does your regional CQM plan include any processes that make it cross parts? This is something that's very important, and especially now that we're working to achieve together and also to end the HIV epidemic, this is more important than ever to think about the cross-partness that our plan can offer and the way that we can make a system of care that is not dependent on funder specifically, but on the fact that we're all serving the same types of lives. It's good to know that 40% of you already do have a plan that is like that. And then do all of the Part B funded providers in your region have their own CQM plans? Texas has required as part of the contract that there is a CQM plan, and we're going to be covering that later. So it's a good thing that there are many of you that are sure that you have that. And for those of you that aren't sure, hopefully we'll be able to equip you with some of the guides and prompts that will help you to assess this and to improve in the field. So thanks for answering that first poll, and I'm going to turn it back to Jamie.
Thanks, Michael. So feel free to use a thumbs up or like clap emoji if this visual looks familiar. We often show this as we talk about the components of a clinical quality management framework, being infrastructure, QI, and performance measurement. So this is what we call the ball and pedestal. And the next couple of slides, I'm going to really focus on the CQM Plan, which is a living document, again, that drives all quality process and directs your different stakeholder involvement, which includes staff and consumers. And the CQM Plan then provides a focus for your performance measurement as it relates to your quality priorities and your quality improvement efforts. And we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So let's talk CQM Plan components. I think oftentimes folks ask like, okay, what do I need in the plan and how do you manage the plan and how does it not turn into like a 60-page document? And, you know, then it kind of takes over your life and you can't really apply it, right? So the next couple of slides are going to help break down the different CQM components. So we see listed out here those different pieces. And really, when you think about your plan, all of these components work toward thinking about how we conceptualize clinical quality management. And those are those 3 pillars, your infrastructure, performance measurement, and quality improvement. So when we think of strategic positioning, this is a section of a plan where you're going to have your focus of what are your quality goals and what's your quality statement, your vision, your mission, and your values. When we think of infrastructure, that's the part of the plan that's going to address leadership, staff involvement, evaluation, and the CQM committee itself. When it comes to performance measurement as part of your plan, that's where you're going to have your performance measure, your actual performance measures that you're looking at. And this is the space where it's a good idea to utilize a table and also include information about the frequency of reporting those measures. When we think of quality improvement as the component in your plan, it's a good idea to keep it broad, right? This is where you want to identify what methodology you're going to utilize. So oftentimes that's the PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act model for improvement. You know, recipients also apply a lean methodology as well. So this is simply where you keep it broad, you include your methodology, also how projects are selected, maybe how you utilize your different teams or how you utilize a QI charter to drive those QI improvement efforts. And then another super key component, which is why it's got that red box around it, are attachments. So one takeaway from today would be that attachments are your friend. Attachments are a space where you can have your work plan, capacity building plan, your performance measurement, submission form, and or instructions. This is where you can have as an attachment your quality improvement project, submission form, and instruction. So each of these, it needs enough information so that you can track progress in your activities across the plan periods. But by having them as attachments, you're not burdening and kind of mucking up your QM plan overall. So now let's focus a little bit more on diving a little bit deeper into that strategic positioning. So this is an opportunity where the quality statement that you have as part of your strategic positioning for your CQM program, This is where your quality statement is really an overarching quality statement that stays pretty much the same over time. And your quality statement is really the purpose behind your CQM program. Quality goals, they're going to help your stakeholders understand what is happening with CQM in a concrete sense. Understanding the different strategic alignment between vision, your quality statement, and your quality goals helps to really sort of smoothen out the quality program, which is going to increase consistency of your team excitement on working toward the goals. Again, it's an opportunity for alignment and clarity. Quality goals are not the same as QI improvement projects. So that's something I do want to note. Your quality goals should be broad enough that your different QI projects can sort of fit into them. And while goals are helpful ways to refine your quality statement and to live your organizational vision and mission, don't get too carried away, right? You want to be judicious, which is why we have that little exclamation. Again, just include goals that are tied to your vision and mission. It's fine to focus on different areas. You can have goals that are, outcomes or process goals. There can be things that touch on operations and finance, but again, maybe keep it a little short and stick to 3 to 5 total, because again, they're your broad overarching goals, and your specific projects, they'll fit within those. Thanks, Julie, for the feedback. So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure, especially leadership. All right, so leadership, this is a key way for leadership to show support. And if we think back to that ball and pedestal, if we don't have the foundation of infrastructure, if we don't have that leadership support and that leadership buy-in, our CQM program is really going to go nowhere fast. So a key way for leaders and for senior leadership to be involved is actually through the approval of a quality management program and the different activities that it encompasses. So a key way to make this happen and a mechanism for that is to have the CQM Plan actually like literally signed or digitally signed by the staff supervisors. So you can sort of create a communication channel sort of up the chain. And this also allows the opportunity to periodically emphasize the importance of quality culture. This gives you an opportunity every year when the plan is signed to give an update. Here's what we've been up to. It's sort of your elevator pitch. It's sort of your moment to share the different activities, to talk about how you've evaluated the program. Here's what we know is working. Here's what we know isn't. It gives an opportunity to show how your CQM program is aligning with the overall strategic vision and mission of your agency. So again, this typically takes the form of a signature page at the end of the presentation. And I can speak, from experience. This is something, I'm in Atlanta now, but I used to work a lot in the state of Missouri. And, we did CQM for like a hot minute before we realized we should have all of the grantees sign off on the statewide plan. And that seems like such a simple thing, but it really changed the sort of communication between the statewide clinical quality management program and all parts for Ryan White. So at the AA level, this might mean having relevant AA staff and stakeholders who sign off on the regional plan. And then at the provider level, this would mean having relevant care team and management staff sign off on the institutional plan. Next slide. Let's talk about infrastructure as it relates to stakeholders. So again, within your plan, you want to make sure that all staff are mentioned, including leadership, especially knowing leadership has an important role for buy-in, support, and approval. You definitely want to include the community touch points, like who, what, and when, and delineate the different ways that stakeholders can be involved. So in this section of the plan, you would describe the ways in which involvement of all staff is important. And this helps you by delineating this out and speaking to the importance and speaking to the involvement. It's an opportunity to exhibit a quality culture. So beyond the staffing level, I also like to think about ways staff are involved, maybe in participating in different committees or QI teams, as well as staff experience evaluation. And another key opportunity here to create a culture of quality and alignment and consistency is to actually align the language within staff position descriptions, maybe and/or performance reviews with a description of the stuff that they're doing as part of the CQM involvement. I think that's also key for sustainability as well. So at the AA level, you should consider listing other key groups that you would involve. So that might be planning council. If you're at FTC, you could consider including your task force. You know, Michael mentioned earlier achieving together. So that's an example of folks to include. And now we can move on to the next slide, which is still on the theme of infrastructure. We've done leadership, we've done stakeholders. Now let's talk about the actual CQM committee, which is always exciting, right? These are the peeps that are driving the effort and taking that CQM plan and making it happen. So the committees are key because they're tying together the plans and the vehicle for progress in organizations. We want to really be mindful that your CQM committee is drawing from all corners of the organization. We typically suggest not having more than 10 to 15 people so that the committee allows for efficient discussion and motion. We don't get stuck in this cycle of talking, no choices, no action. But at the same time, it's not so small that there's not the appropriate level of representation by different stakeholders and again, across the organization. So when folks actually, you know, sometimes you have a lot of interest, right? And so keeping it at that sort of Goldilocks right size is a challenge. You know, keep in mind that you can utilize subcommittees and other sort of functional teams for folks who are interested in a level of involvement if you start to go sort of beyond that 10 to 15. And then an important distinction to make is between the quality committee, which is broader and it includes a cross-section of program staff, and then consumers as well. In making these distinctions, just be sure to be judicious and let folks know what is your meeting frequency and duration. We always want to balance meaningful work without sort of overburdening folks, especially since there's so many Zoom meetings and so many other things coming out. So again, clarity and communication about roles and responsibilities will also be important for your CQM committee. So when we think of the sort of the umbrella of infrastructure, there's also consumer involvement, which is an important goal for our Runway HIV/AIDS programs, you know, at all levels and across all parts. So sometimes we have a resident consumer expert among our staff. So it's great to be inclusive, to be discreet, to be respectful. And we also recognize that consumer involvement can be challenging at the AA and provider level. This could be because of trust issues. This could be because, you know, it's always the same folks volunteering for the same everything, which can also create burnout or just, it's hard to bring in that diversity of opinion and thought. This is one of my favorite pieces is to don't go to a support group expecting profound innovation, right? Involvement and engagement are different things, meaningful involvement, and how do we foster that dynamic within our CQM programs? And it's also important to be action focused and results oriented from the consumer perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about the CQM committee continued. So be mindful that your committee is laid out completely in the plan. Lots of times we utilize members and we do roles, not names. If you want to do names, that's cool as well, because, you know, the idea is that you're reviewing this annually. So if those things change, you know, it gets caught. But it's also a good idea just to stick with roles as well. You want to make sure that you're inclusive of what are the different functions. This might be data review, who's going to maintenance the plan, how do we process our different quality goals. Be specific about your frequency of your meetings, you know, quarterly, monthly, it's every third Thursday, etc. And definitely the locations of the meetings. Right now, we're very much in a virtual space, but when we go back to potentially in person, if that's possible, that's important as well. You want to include the determination of your quality projects. You know, how do you make those decisions? How do you arrive at that? And how do you prioritize when you have, you know, 4 or 5 different things that folks have energy around doing? How do you select where to start first? Also the assignment of QI teams, and then who's responsible for analyzing your QM plan evaluation. Let's talk about let's talk about evaluation, right? So similar to other areas of the quality management plan, your evaluation section will outline your standard evaluation of the CQM program. So some things to ask yourself are, what is the logic model? What data are collected and reviewed as part of the evaluation? Do you have changes in your plan from review year to year? And you want to make sure that sustainability is always strongly emphasized here. There are different types of evaluation. You could utilize internal findings based on your work plan. Obviously, evaluation and feedback from our friends and funders at HRSA and HAB, different site visits, and or the different experience evaluation, whether that be staff or consumer based. And keep in mind, again, evaluation can be utilized in that sort of elevator pitch when you're having your leadership sign off on your plan to update them as to what's happening. So that was a whole lot that we covered within infrastructure. Let's dive a little bit into performance measurement, because I think oftentimes when people develop their plans, performance measurement is sort of a space that can get kind of muddy a little quick because it's hard to want to keep things simple. But again, we recommend maybe utilizing a table. And we recognize that performance measurement is a key activity and that by having it in your plan, this is where you can sort of formalize it. We would really encourage you to include just a short opening narrative that describes the measure, the process for measure selection, what the measures are, frequency of collection, the various data sources that are utilized. And then it's also a great idea to literally put, where do you turn when you have questions or concerns, which with performance measurement and with data, we can definitely anticipate having. So if you utilize a simple table, again, that would want to include all the information that recipient CQM staff and subrecipient staff need to know to generate and track all their performance measurement pieces. Awesome. So QI, right? Let's kind of zoom out and keep this at the big picture. Earlier, I mentioned in this section, this is a great idea for where you want to be broad. Keeping in mind, you want to mention the specific methodology. HRSA and HAB has made it clear through PCN 1502 that QI needs to follow some form of methodology, right? So what is that for you? Is it a model for improvement? Maybe it's lean, maybe sometimes you utilize both. Just keep it broad and mention your methodology, as well as how do you do some priority setting and how do you go about QI project selection. This is also a space that we can mention the use of charters, right? And it's keeping it broad and it's maybe mentioning the use of a charter where you can use it an attachment to say, here's an example of what a charter is, which then becomes another resource and tool for subrecipients, which is great. Also with QI improvement, what is the utilization of state level teams? This might be for participants to engage at the state level along their interests and to promote stronger buy-in and participation with subrecipient agencies. This also allows for another nod at sort of cross-part collaboration. And then also with QI improvement, you do want to touch a little bit on your QI data management, which includes project reporting, maybe some different training and capturing of other activities related to QI. So now that we've talked about some of those components, let's dive into different attachments, because again, attachments are your friend. The work plan, this is like, the most happening kid of all attachments, right? It's the one that we're used to seeing, we're used to working on. So how do we sort of, not get a little lax in our work plans? This is, again, a single document that's all necessary and relevant areas tied together. Oftentimes folks utilize Excel. This is where you have your different quality management staff tasks. It might be staff specific, it might be committee specific. Again, if you are utilizing subcommittees, that's an opportunity to give a nod to the different work and pieces that they're charged with. And this may also include internal and external committee tasks as well. Let's talk a little bit about other attachments. So at the AA level, it's helpful to have attachments that, again, double as those communication tools that can, one, set provider or subrecipient expectations, and then also, two, can literally be the tools to support them in their capacity to do the work. This could include the data collection plan, the QI form with the methodology that you've selected, standard survey instruments, and different capacity building. At the provider level, it's useful to have attachments that will drive the work plan progress. Again, QI process tools or capacity building plans are two great examples. And I think that kind of sets the stage for the first little section of talking about infrastructure. And now Michael and I want to open it up for a little bit of guided discussion.
All right. So thanks so much, Jamie, for that overview. It definitely was a lot of information, but I believe that many of you probably have encountered this before. As we're talking about this entire series, we're trying to make sure that we're speaking to people who are champions and very well seasoned in these matters, and that we're also leaving space for people who are brand new, because we know that there are some folks who are brand new to the field as well who have been joining us on these calls. So since I've taken the screen down, I'd like to invite folks to turn their cameras on so we can have this opportunity to just discuss together, you know, what questions you may have, what concerns you may have about this component, what your experience has been really in trying to drive quality from the QM plan standpoint. We're going to have additional components that look at the QM committee specifically, and then also the leadership principles that you can exercise as an AA. So I just wanted now, Jamie and I wanted now to take a moment to see, you know, what your feedback and response is to just the QM plan component. Is this an area where you feel like you've had great success? Is this an area where you feel like you've had some challenges? Are there any burning questions that you've had that you've been, you know, kind of mulling over, or something that you've been asked in the field that you feel like, you know, that you'd love an answer to?
So just to get the ball rolling, I have a couple of topics maybe that might get people asking questions.
Yes.
Thing that Chris from HRSA commented on was in Texas, we have such large QM committees. And I know that's because we're trying to be very inclusive and have a lot of stakeholder involvement and consumer involvement. So it's really hard for us to keep it under 15. So through some guidance from Chris and Michael and Jamie, we've slimmed ours down at the state to our internal folks that have specific information that are important and key to the QM plan for us. And then we have the external committee where we are tapping into each of the 7 administrative agencies, which hopefully cover the whole state. So it does get complicated, and we at the state are kind of in the beginning phases of refiguring that all out. So does anyone else find that as kind of a confusing or challenging thing to keep your QM committee under 15 while still having a lot of stakeholder involvement? Or any thoughts or comments or?
Hi, Rhonda.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can. Happy Monday.
Yay. Happy Monday. I can't do my video for some reason. I don't know what's going on with that, but glad you can hear me. Julie, you're so right. I was just now pulling up my committee and I have 19 spots. And I'm looking at it like, wow, but a majority is our internal committee because we have so many different people that are needed, are necessary to be there, but we could even pull them back to be just the AA portion of that CQM. And then not to say they wouldn't attend our quarterly meetings, but rather to make sure the structure is a little bit more conducive for what the job and what the role is. Because each one, you know, it's so important, but it all depends on what we're working on. So I was just looking at one particular spot is our nurse who serves as a navigator, but will also be serving with roles in the Ending the HIV Epidemic Plan. So that person is going to kind of be in 2 roles, but we won't necessarily need them for every single goal that we set or every single project that we set. but yeah, even though I thought we had everything all lined up, now as we're talking, it's like, gosh, we could even look at that once again, so we can make sure things align a little bit better.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much for that, Rhonda. And I think Jamie used the word judicious a lot in her presentation. And I think that it's really important that we find a way to lean out, you know, the expectations. Like all we need to do is tap into our own humanity, right? And we're like, another meeting, you know, how do these things kind of work together? And all of a sudden it makes sense sometimes why we have empty seats, or, you know, an email doesn't get responded to. And I really value that, Rhonda, thinking about the specific ways that individuals play into different processes. Sometimes they're liaisons, and maybe they're just basically reading notes and providing feedback, you know, or maybe they only are needed for conversations that have a specific topical, you know, focus. And so like sometimes they'll be needed 3 times in the year and sometimes not at all. But as long as you start to like really start to parse out exactly what the specific function of each role is on your committee, that really should help you to be more judicious in like making demands on other people's times. And then they'll feel, you know, very happy about participating. They're like, oh my God, you're the one person who actually thinks about whether or not I'm needed and what value I will add to this conversation. You know, I think, you know, an important group to think about is like data managers, for example. The 4 data managers are always being asked to produce and run data for us, right? But they're also provide important context in a meeting. Well, there's something to say. You can organize your quarterly meetings. If it's a 2-hour meeting, the first 45 minutes every time is data. Data manager, can you please commit to the first 45 minutes, and then you get the gift of time. There are so many ways that we can think about this and structure it in a way that makes the most sense for the work that we're really trying to accomplish in the field. Jamie, is there any other perspective that you would add on that?
No, I think that's great. You know, just being a little bit mindful, and I would agree with data managers and sometimes other, you know, highly clinical level people. Time is always of the essence. I think back to the topic though, you know, a lot of folks also sometimes when it comes to their plan, it seems like the quality goals can be a space of challenge. You know, keeping it broad enough that your different projects and efforts can fit within that umbrella, but also it being meaningful. I think folks sometimes struggle with, you know, drafting something that speaks to, you know, the work that they're doing. So I've often kind of seen that become a challenge when people, you know, start to put pen to paper or, you know, finger to keyboard.
That's such an important point. And like, I think that thinking about the strategic positioning of CQM, you know, in our program and what it is it's trying to accomplish and how that is so critical. And again, is a really important way to Julie's point that she made in the chat room, that you can engage your leaders. We want to make sure that this quality program is aligned with our overall arching organizational strategic goals and approaches. Can you please help us to craft some language here that makes sure that we are spot on with this? Great point. What other questions or concerns have you had over time or are occurring to you now? I can see some folks on the line here who I've worked with over many years, and I see some folks who I know are new. So you can take it either way. You know, there's no question that's too advanced and there's no question that's too simple.
I have another question since everyone's being so
Bring
quiet
it.
this morning.
Bring
So
it.
some of us have like 5-year plans and some of us have 2-year plans and some of us have a plan, right? That's like for now and maybe for a year. And we of course always review our plan annually, but what would your recommendation be? And is it okay to have different ones for different, you know, areas?
Yeah, my recommendation would be that it's, you know, do what works best for you based on your own timeline and your own cycle for business and projects. You know, you would think that there would be not too great of a range, but if there is, then that's fine too. We at the beginning talked about the variability of AAs and that we have a number of AAs that are, you know, tied to metropolitan areas and some that are more diffuse, you know, far-reaching rural areas. And so it would make sense if there would be variation, to that end specifically. Jamie, I don't know if there's additional feedback or thoughts that you would have to that question.
I think that as long as the plan is reviewed, the review of the plan happens at the frequency that you say it's supposed to. And again, you're utilizing attachments, right? I think as long as you do that, the plan itself can cover 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. I think you have more flexibility, as Michael said, to do what works for you. But it's really the review of the plan and the use of attachments so that things don't become, outdated or untouched.
Yeah.
That's key. Great question, Julie.
Come on, guys. I get questions throughout the year. We have some experts here. Nobody has any questions? I can think of another one that I often struggle with. How much information or content should we be putting about quality assurance in our plan? At our first session, we really hit hard on the differences of what's administration, what's QA, what's QI. But when I think of CQM with the M word, right, management, that it kind of encompasses both QA and QI, but I don't want to get too QA in my QI, right?
I think that is such an important point. And I believe that this is handled more within the context of the quality improvement section. You have minimum standards in your service standards, and you have minimum expectations that are required basically to keep your grant and to maintain funding. All of those expectations are QA expectations, right? And so I would say that giving a nod in the plan to following minimum required expectations is important. You can put that in your infrastructure. I think that also that speaks to the fact that you're part of a system of care, that you have funding that comes from above and that you pass it through to below. That's an important thing to potentially include in your infrastructure as well, because it has to do with the logical way that you have created your system of care and this plan. But I think the service standards really is where the greatest magic and where the greatest crossover from QA to QI is, because what we find in our service standards, if there are deficiencies, we go back to teams and community to have a conversation about those service standards. Do the service standards make sense? Do they need to be revised? If so, in what way? And that really does become QI, thinking about the way that it's been defined in the Ryan-White HIV/AIDS program. So I would say that really what we want to do, even in terms of thinking about the performance measurement aspects, is to think about the PCN 1502 only, and it's QI with an emphasis on outcomes. And if we're going to bring in QA, to talk about it a little bit in terms of infrastructure, that yep, we're part of a system of care and there are expectations, and that in QI, we're talking about how we actually take the information that comes from these compliance processes, and of course comes from our bellwether performance measures for quality. But that's how we generate our QI projects, is based on actual demonstrated need or challenges that come out of the system. And it's not, we're going to take something that is subpar and bringing it to minimum expectations, because that's not quality improvement. In order to make the argument for quality improvement, we have to make this argument. We came above the minimum expectations. And this part of the story, as far as CQM is concerned, is less important to our federal partners than this part of the story. Does that make sense? Seeing some nods and some thumbs up. So Julia is absolutely slaying these questions today. Oh, go ahead, Jamie.
But the good news is, guys, we just evaluated our 2020 monitoring outcomes. And as a state, we're at 83% if we add all of the indicators together and average them out. So we are there, right? Now we're in our stage where we can start really focusing on QI. But look at your individual areas scores in the monitoring database, and you can identify where you are below 75. And then that's not QI, right? That's just meeting the expectations, but you still got to do it. That would be corrective action plans. But then if you're above 75 and you want to get to 100 or whatever, then you can call that QI, right? With the project and all those things. not just a corrective action plan. Is everyone clear on that? Or I think that's really one of our biggest struggles in Texas. But we're getting there, guys. We're doing really well. All of you are doing such great work. Thank you.
I do,
Pam,
I do
go
want to
ahead,
just
Jen.
highlight, we have a couple of questions in the chat. So one of them has to do, well, we have some encouragement, right? That education and delineating between what's quality assurance, QA, and what is QI, you know, that being sort of something that Rhonda shared, that's one of the biggest needs and biggest things that she's sort of constantly educating. But we have a couple of questions. We have one question from Stephen, who asked if there will be more discussion about the various ways to measure improvement and outcomes, if we're going to talk a little bit more about the various ways to do that. And then we also have a question from Tiffany. How can you handle smaller agencies? So she shared that some of their agencies, for example, may do transportation or another service, and they may only have 5 to 10 employees.
I think that that's so important, and that goes back to judiciousness, right? Like, there needs to be a way for us to think and to operate, you know, using quality improvement methodologies and, you know, our federal partners' clinical quality management like framework that makes sense and fits every size program. And I think that the way that you handle that is that you help them to identify, you know, so why did we fund you? What value do you add to this system of care? You know, and to just help them to unpack that and to analyze just that. Your role in the system of care is to make sure that people get to their appointments. Let's only focus on that and the degree to which we're actually helping people get to their appointments. And if there are other opportunities that we can have to help improve their endpoint health outcomes. Now, we need to be really careful with this because PCN 1602 does limit a little bit, you know, what we can do concretely in terms of service delivery. But, you know, sometimes we're going to end up identifying, you know, the van service is an important piece of it, but there's another piece of it that's important. Like, I had no idea that, you know, literally these vans are almost like driving support groups because the bonds that the people have on that van are so important. Again, remember, I'm a person living with HIV, you know, so I have that mentality and that kind of like background that comes with it. And that is sometimes a finding, right? I think that it's important if you are looking at a transportation only agency and having them focus on the continuum of care and all of that, you're going to end up missing the point for what their role is in the system of care as they're funded to be. So you just always got to go back to those basics. And I think that also thinking about like how the suite of services you design and fund and evaluate play into achieving together, it goes that way too, right? So we can think about, hi, I'm an administrative agency. I've funded these agencies. They provide a whole bunch of services. Some of them are only supportive services. And I need to help them to think about how they play into the system of care so that I know what my system of care is so I can play up back into that larger cross parts function. Does that make sense? And I don't know if there's other feedback or thoughts that others would like to share, because I know that I'm certainly not the only expert on the phone. We have Lisa, we have you know, Oscar now too. Like, so anyone, please feel free. If you're a champion, we'd like for you to also like to use your voice as a champion on these calls.
We did have Rhonda share, and I think this is great. So one of the things that she started doing was holding coaching sessions so that there could be a little bit more of that individualized, you know, tailoredness to each agency's uniqueness and sort of develop the QM functions of where they're at, which I think is a fantastic, that's a fantastic idea. And that's another way to kind of champion and meet peeps where they are and keep in mind size and scope of the different agencies and their bandwidth. Very cool.
You know, that actually just made me think about, I didn't respond to the other question that was posed. Are we going to be looking at measurement for improvement? Yes. Our January session is focused on the performance measurement and QI components. And so we're going to be looking at that, you know, drilling really deeply into that with Jasmine. And Jamie's going to be back in February to talk about the capacity building component. So the elements that were just raised around coaching, how we can use the organizational assessment and the specific CQM plan attachments that our provider agencies develop to help to champion in a custom tailored way, so that we're not loading on all of these overly aggressive expectations on the little guy, and that we're not giving little whispers of nothing to the big guy that can take care of a lot more. Well, this presentation and conversation has been amazing so far. And I don't know if there's any other comments, questions, concerns that we want to elevate before we move on to the next section.
Hey, this is Rhonda again. I just wanted to say one more thing that we discovered when we started doing the coaching sessions is that our smaller agencies who provide just like a handful of services really have some wonderful ideas to share. And then also realizing that since they are a smaller agency, some of the activities and things that are required can be quite cumbersome because they may have one staff member serving on multiple different committees or activities, and they're all related to administrative agencies. They may be attending all these different meetings with these different AA, like the data team or a different committee, and it's very, very time consuming for them. And so what that helped us realize is that we need to systematically change our structure and communicate better so that we can align their meetings, and we're not taking up all their time, because they've got, a handful of service categories, but they have a handful of staff. And so we're taking away from them being able to deliver services just so we can have all these meetings. So that was a realization that only came out of our coaching session.
Yeah, I am, that resonates with me like so intensely. I'm dating someone now who's a New Jersey Italian. And so like the idea that comes to mind is that sometimes as funders, we can come across as vinugumbats, you know what I mean? Like, hey, come to this meeting or else, or send this report or else. I think that another way to think about that is that like we're more interested in checking boxes than having results. And I think that that's amazing, Rhonda, that you were able to get that perspective out of your subrecipients, and that you're actually able to make credible real-time changes based on that feedback. That's exactly how the system should work.
We did have, oh, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
I was going to say, hi, Michael. This is Lisa.
Hey, Lisa.
I will turn on my camera. I saw Maribel's question in the chat box, and it's talking about taking clients' perspective and how to be respectful and take their perspective. And I just want to say, I think if you invest in training, it helps people with HIV really understand that this is not only about their individual experience, but is also about the broader community experience. And Caitlin is on here from my office, but we've done the consumers and quality training. We've done the building leaders of color training. We've actually blended those two together. And I think it really, if the clients are educated and empowered, focusing on overall service delivery improvement comes along with that training.
Yeah. Giving people the comfort, like the kind of like the baseline that you have, giving people the tools and giving them that power to say, I don't get it, or that doesn't make sense to me. I think that that is so important to, changing the way that we do business and the way that we interact with folks. Because we can, again, all we need to do is to reflect back on our own humanity, on those times that, really encouraged us, and made us feel like, oh, damn, I have to do this or else I'm missing out, versus those times where you're like, oh, they mean well, but they don't get it. Or like, I don't have time for this, like, or just plain like, no way. I think that mentality of helping people to be all they can be and kind of like understanding what really drives them is going to be the best way forward. It's great to see you, Lisa.
It's awesome to see you, Michael. It's been too long.
It has been. And that's a great question, Maribel. Thank you for that. All right, let me turn back on our presentation here because we have 2 more sections to go through. All right, I'm going to be taking the lead on this next section for CQM committees. And we did provide you a little bit of a background on CQM committees in terms of thinking about the CQM plan, but we're going to be talking more concretely now about CQM committee and CQM committee function. And before we do that, we just have another poll for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie as I pull this up and get it going. Jamie, you may be muted.
Oh, okay. Right on. So let's talk a little bit about these polling questions. So the first question we have is, do you have a CQM committee that includes all Part B funded entities in your region? Again, we could do yes, no, or if you're not sure, the safe space to click that. The second question we have for folks is, does your regional CQM committee have a consumer member? And third, do all of the Part B funded providers in your region have their own CQM committees? So these questions are a lot like the plan, except this time we're turning it to the other component of the CQM committee. We've got about 11 of 40 respondents, so we'll wait for folks to chime in. Let's try to maybe hit almost 30, get closer to like 70% of the votes. All right, we've hit 70. We've got 28 responses. So if we want to end the poll, we can. And let's share some results. So it looks like around 79% of people do have a committee that includes all Part B funded entities, which is awesome. In terms of a regional CQM committee having consumer membership, again, 75% there, 2/3, it's fantastic. And hopefully for those who aren't sure, or who that might be a no for, some of the things that we talk about in this committee section, can help change that. And then for our last question, it looks like 57%, so more than half do have all of the Part B funded providers in their region with committees. We do have about 36, around 10 respondents who said they weren't sure. So we have hopefully some touch points to follow up on after today's training.
Awesome. Thanks so much for walking us through that poll. And thanks everyone for your responses. It really is so helpful for us to have a good sense of where you're at and how we can provide, the best guidance and presentation moving forward. So since this is all about CQM infrastructure, we want to just emphasize again that the main 2 components of CQM infrastructure are your CQM plan and your CQM committee. And now we're going to be talking about how the CQM committee is the way that we bring our CQM plan to life. So the CQM committee's purpose really is to bring together stakeholders from a cross-section of your service area. And we'd mentioned that before previously in terms of thinking about how this is spelled out in the plan, but it's done that way on purpose to make sure that we really have a good sense of what it is that we're trying to do as a service area and what that's supposed to mean. To that end, one of the main things that the CQM committee does is it reviews performance measurement data that's curated by the CQM team. And I think that it's important for us to think about our PCN 1502 CQM performance measures as one of the main items that we're going to be looking at. But through the committee, we also have the opportunity conversationally to be hearing about the other processes that are going well or less well, opportunities, deficiencies in the field that we see through our site visit process, consumer perspectives that may bring our awareness to some new challenge or new emerging solution that's coming through the pipelines. The idea here is that we really have the opportunity to discuss what is actually happening on the ground as it relates to the services we provide and our position within the system to provide those services. Obviously, it advises on the clinical quality management program activities. And one of the best ways to do that is by looking at the work plan. And the work plan itself is a way to conversationally make sure that we're bringing up these issues and items in a way that makes sense and builds toward our work and builds toward the story that we're producing as a part of our CQM program. The CQM committee is also an opportunity for peer learning and the sharing of best practices. So the AA and the provider staff and consumers will all have training in CQM and QI. You could think about this as something that's all done individually. And to a certain extent, that's probably a good idea for reasons that Lisa and Maribel were just discussing, that a lot of times we as professionals will have additional background and understanding in the way that this operates. Whereas some of our other partners like consumers will not have had that training or experience. Occasionally, if we want to bring in some of the other folks that, Rhonda had mentioned, or I think we had mentioned conversationally in the last section, if we need to make a more expansive team, some of those other expanded members may also not have the experience that we have as it relates to quality management and quality improvement. And so that would be like thinking about a transgender advocacy group that may or may not be in our healthcare neighborhood. And if we want to engage them in a discussion on something that relates to a project that we're planning and we're inviting them on an ad hoc basis to our committee, we may have to train them too. So it's really important to think about leveling the playing field. When we have a committee and we create this cross-section of people to join our discussions, we have to provide them with the resources to be able to participate meaningfully. Otherwise, what the hell are we doing, right? Provider coordination of activities related to regional QI projects also happens. And this is where the sharing of best practices can come in, because really it's the opportunity for people to share what it is that they did specifically and what the result is. Since the many different people that will come from our many different funded agencies will all go about solving problems slightly differently, this will really enrich our conversation because we'll be able to talk about the merits of doing something in one way versus another and how that was received internally by our staff that were delivering changes and services in a changed environment, and our clients who are receiving these changed services. Lastly, the CQM committee helps to demonstrate passion and attracts back more passion from providers and consumers alike. So it's an echo chamber of goodness. I'm sure that we have felt what it's like to be part of an echo chamber of negativity, when everyone kind of comes around the table and crosses their arms and furrows their brow and talks about how everything isn't working and how we'll never be able to accomplish our goals, and how that saps the energy and the promise and the hope out of the room. This actually should be the opposite. And what we should always seek to do in the CQM committee is to make sure that we maximize the opportunities for upward spiraling and minimize the opportunities for downward spiraling. When we're presented with something that's counterfactual or something that sounds negative, we should seek to immediately address that with something that is positive. This is just a quick reminder that grant administration is not clinical quality management. We've already emphasized that conversationally, but it's really important for us to be able to re-emphasize that now. Because again, we need to be able to think about the work that we're doing in our committee in terms of actual quality management. And if we spend too much time in our committee talking about whether or not we're able to deliver as many HIV tests or produce as many mental health screens or link as many people to care as we said we would, then we're actually veering back into grant administration area, and we're not focused enough on quality management and quality improvement. So our goal really is to keep asking ourselves and to keep pushing ourselves to the point, is this conversation about endpoint outcomes? Not a game like, oh, well, you know, because the process leads to outcome. No, we have to be very, very concrete here. Is this conversation about outcomes? If no, then maybe we should end it and find another meeting or opportunity to have this conversation, because this conversation in our CQM committee is supposed to be about endpoint outcomes. We've already mentioned this, but the committee structure should include a cross-section of all your stakeholders. It should meet regularly and be work plan driven. I personally think that monthly is okay. Quarterly is about as infrequent as you want to meet, and weekly is too much, because you're not going to be able to see enough change. And in order to justify the meeting weekly, you're going to overload your CQM program and crush everyone under unattainable expectations. This is an interesting, theory, right? That the frequency that your committee meets is actually going to dictate or predict how much work you can do, or how overly exceeding your expectations will be if you decide to meet too frequently. As we mentioned, your CQM committee should be described fully in your CQM plan. So who are the members and how are they trained? From a staff standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, from a special guest standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, who are your members and how are they trained? The capacity building plan as attachment is a way to get into the details. And I think that roughly you're in good shape if you're able to just stand back and to think about, how you can describe that activity looser, and then just reference the capacity building plan. You want to be able to think about how the CQM committee interacts with other relevant structures at your agency. So while it's written down in your plan, you should seek to make this real in your committee. So if at your AA level, you have a fast track city task force or Achieving Together task force, how are you taking your CQM activities and making sure that it is crossing over? And the other way too, that the activities from your task force are crossing over into your CQM committee. If you have a planning council, how does your CQM committee interact with your planning council? There are opportunities here for the sharing of information. And I think that should be spelled out so that we're able to actually deliver that at the end of the day. How are decisions made that affect the CQM activities and QI activities for the service area care and treatment services? So, what does it mean that we're making decisions here, and how does it affect the services being provided in the field? These are things that are lofty considerations for us to pontificate, but I think that it's really important for us to be concrete in the way that we actualize this and we do this work in the field. We mentioned already that CQM committees are best when they have fewer than 15 members, and we want to make sure that there's consistent and diverse participation from across your service area. But there might be opportunities for us to potentially, expand that using subcommittees. And again, the 15 is just tap into your own humanity. If you're trying to have a conversation and a deliberative process, are you able to actually give everyone equal floor time to honor their contributions if there's 20 or 30 people around the table? Consumers are really an important part of the committee, but the interaction with the parallel consumer groups is important as well. So you want to make sure that there's a representative, but a lot of times we'll have a consumer advisory board that is a consumer dedicated group, right? And it's a group of consumers that are doing activities that are playing into the way that we consider and make improvements to the services that we're delivering through our shops. Thinking about the way that we even train consumers and talk to consumers as a part of that. Sometimes we might be providing training to consumers that are part of a consumer advisory board that aren't necessarily CQM committee members, but that's really important for the dynamics of the way that quality operates in our field. And I think that it's really important to think about this too, from the level of your administrative agency versus the level of the provider agencies. The provider agencies probably have more of these considerations about parallel groups and other activities. So it's really important too, when you think about your CQM committee, you know, how your work is additive and supportive and not duplicative and redundant. Redundancy doesn't really have as much of a place here from a deliberative process, because then you have two different groups discussing the same thing. What if they come up with different solutions? Then you end up having a huge problem on your hands that can create, you know, major discord and disrupt the way that, you know, the discussion goes within your service area. It's important to think concretely about the way that all of these different moving pieces come together, how decision-making flows, who's providing feedback, who's providing input, who is taking the lead. Because of this level of complication, we advise that if you're brand new and if you've never had a committee before, that you don't do subcommittees. And this is really important, I think, for the guidance that you provide to the provider agencies in the field, that don't make perfect the enemy of good here, right? Start where you can and start simple, and then add complexity, add nuance as you roll down the road and as you build experience and a level of comfort and confidence with the subject matter. So performance measurement is a really important piece. And I'd forgotten that we were going to talk about it a little bit more today too. So, so here you go. So why are we looking at performance measurement data in our CQM committee? The purpose is to review data that will advise on potential QI projects. This is the discovery activity. What are the processes that are excelling? And what are the processes that are really challenged? And how does that affect our endpoint patient outcomes? The data is going to end up being curated by your AACQM team to focus on areas that are identified as the most important. You know, within your administrative agency, you likely have a data expert or a data manager who is responsible for this. So the CQM team in your AA would be responsible for coordinating with that individual to help produce the data displays or arrays that you're going to be using for conversational purposes. I am a big data nerd myself, and so I always believe in the importance of transparency. And so it's good to make the full data set that's available for review, even if you're only going to be talking about small portions of it during your meeting. And this then empowers your committee members to go back and to provide their own additional context and level of their own eyeball and their own brain to it. Sometimes you'll find that you'll end up getting more feedback than you had expected, and in very good ways. This next piece, I think, is extraordinarily important in terms of the way that we think of our quality of care programs since we're in 2020. When we say segmentation, what we mean is taking the full data set and then separating it out by different characteristics so that we can identify disparities. So when we think about disparities, we usually think about surface level characteristics, but we can also think about other characteristics as well. The important thing is that we're looking at health equity, right? And we're looking at potential directions for QI activities. And the purpose here is that if we have a retention rate of, say, 80%, is everyone doing the same? Or are some groups doing better than others? And we can ask this same question across the measures we're looking at. This, again, is one of the important reasons for the AACQM team to be able to work with the data manager to curate this data so that we're providing just the right amount of information for people to actually consider and act on that. And we're not giving them a fire hose to drink from that's going to end up like scaring them away or making them feel like this is an impossible task. So quality improvement. What do we do with quality improvement in our CQM committee? Well, again, I've already emphasized the importance of training your members in CQM basics and in QI methods in particular. But I think it's really important to think about QI projects being structured and that they do have an actual life cycle that starts with discovery and ends with, hopefully, a write-up to close out the project. And what we should be thinking about is what activities are subrecipients going to do that's tied to the overall service area and to the QI project that we're planning and programming. Does anything happen at the AA level that is above and beyond the CQM committee meeting? So thinking about training and reporting expectations, Jamie had mentioned the importance of providing ongoing CQM performance measurement reports as a part of the work plan, and also thinking about QI project reports as a part of, not the work plan, the attachments to the CQM plan. And that's basically something that you should consider as a CQM committee. We're creating a project. What do we need? What types of trainings and resources do we need to provide to people on the ground who are doing this? Not so that they can walk away feeling they know everything, but so that they know enough to be meaningfully involved in this project and they feel confident and ready to be a part of it. That's a really important consideration, right? Because it's super easy for us to go overboard and for us to be like, oh, how do you retain people in care? Well, it all began in ancient Mesopotamia. We need to avoid those types of situations. Lastly, it's important for us to think about QI projects structured in a way that projects being selected on data, priorities, and relevance to participating sites. So it's a hazard for us to make decisions in a vacuum at the AA level and to not really meaningfully involve our subrecipients or our provider organizations in that decision-making process. This, again, is one of the reasons why it's important for us to design our QI committee, our QM committee, in a way that allows us to involve some of our subrecipients so we can garner their perspectives as we're moving along and planning and designing, so that it's not too late when they say that's not possible, when we actually start to unroll the project. So the work plan, as one of the most important CQM plan attachments, is an efficient method for tracking your tasks in your CQM committee. And in fact, I think is one of the most important ties you have between your CQM plan and your CQM committee. And it's what ties that infrastructure all together. It's guidance for all the CQM work that's happening in your service area, from training to assessment to collecting data, to the submission of the QI project reports. When you're having different meetings, you can even be tracking to a certain extent the level of attendance at meetings. Did you end up getting everyone, to the meeting who we needed? It's a communication tool as well that we can use to help make sure that everyone understands what it is that we're trying to do and how it is that we're going about that. This is something that if you do have an overarching provider meeting, you can help to share at the end of the year or at the beginning of a year what happened overall for your quality project or process. And that is a really strong communication tool that you can even use external to your CQM program. It's a communication tool that you can provide upwards to DSHS and that they can provide upwards to HAB. It's a communication tool that you can use in conjunction with your task force or Achieving Together committee. It is an important communication tool, not only to drive the work internally within the group itself, but also thinking about how we discuss the work and what we've actually been able to accomplish. So some important things to include are things that I've already kind of rattled down: the data reviews and presentations, training for new members, how we're going to be reporting our activities and on what timeline, how we're going to be generating QI projects, and what the trajectory of that project timeline will be. So this is one of my crazy Michael Hager mind maps. So just bear with me for just a moment. But my way of thinking about how to leverage stakeholders is, again, thinking about social psychology and tapping into my own humanity. I know that there are certain things that really turn me on and certain things that really turn me off. I think that, in terms of thinking about how you can leverage people's passion, you can leverage stakeholders by having pools of clinical data, funding data, patient care experience, provider service delivery experience, risk and behavior information, sets of recommendations. You can have information that's coming from the literature. You can have information that's coming from national TA centers. There's a lot of different pools of information that you can use to really help to fire up the passion points of the people you've engaged in your committee. And I think that the important thing to think about is to know your committee. What are the things that turn them on as individuals? And what are the things that turn them off as individuals? And then you obviously just try to emphasize as much of the things that turn them on and leave out the things that turn them off. It's not just enough to be able to provide these pools of information. The clinical data itself is just a big pile of numbers. It's important to be able to provide training around all of this. How do we generate this data? How is it collected? How is it abstracted? And why are we presenting it to you in this way? By having that type of training on what we're looking at, why we're looking at it, and what it means, hey, now we can have a meaningful discussion. And hopefully that training has provided enough of a significant baseline or leveling of the ground so that people who are a medical doctor who has been in practice for 25 years has the same level of confidence as a person living with HIV who hasn't graduated high school. You know, okay, that may be a stretch, but the idea here is that people understand exactly what it is that they can contribute to a conversation, right? And then only through that level of engagement, seeing eye to eye, deliberation, are we able to generate change ideas that are actually going to make a difference. So you can see here, a lot of this activity for QI project generation is starting at the QM committee and really has to do with the way that we're supporting people's ability to meaningfully participate in discussions. The discussion is the most important thing. And of course, what we have in our work group or our committee then rolls up to other decision-making bodies that help us to generate what our actual QI activities are going to be to help us roll them out as we move forward. So we've already mentioned there are lots of opportunities to engage with our stakeholders. This section has been on CQM committees, but we should also, again, think about those other touch points that we have with other groups of people to meet deliberatively to identify what it is about our care delivery system or process that is good, bad, ugly, could be improved. So that would include the consumer involvement mechanisms, other community involvement mechanisms, whether they be faith-based or immigrant-based or sexual minority-based or anything. And of course, planning groups like the planning councils, the HIV planning group, the Ending the HIV Epidemic planning group, and the Fast Track City planning group. In the end, if we're able to do this well, which I'm confident we are, we're going to be able to whip it and whip it good. This is just something that I always find like a fun little treat is when they take a song and turn it into a flow diagram. And for trivia fans, this is a really great way to teach flow diagrams because people like music and people understand it. And, you can start to actually show them how it works. But, all that to say, really, this is a matter of process, is all here. We have our passionate stakeholders. We have tons of quantitative data. We have ever-growing sources of qualitative data. And we're starting today to try to connect some of these dots. And really, it's all about ongoing engagement, and that's what's coming, and we will whip it good. So I know that we don't have a placeholder here, but I just wanted to take a moment to take a step back and to see if there's any questions, concerns, comments about this last piece on CQM committees before we move into our final section on AA leadership. No? All right, well, let's move into our final section, and then we'll see if there's additional questions that we can answer at the end for you all. So hold on just a moment. My computer is being a total pill, and it wants to. There we go. All All right, Jamie, do you want to get us started with this? Because I think we have a poll in a second again, right?
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, I think we're just excited to kind of move into this third phase of diving into the different leadership in the CQM. And so we'll start off with a poll.
Dun, 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 dun.
Now we'll all have the pit song stuck in our heads for the remainder of the day as well.
Whip it good. Has a problem come along, you must whip it. Whip it good.
Awesome. All right, so let's take a quick poll in terms of, does your region have a central repository or access point or some kind of centralized portal for your CQM stakeholders to access documents and important information related to your region's programs? So this could be like Basecamp, Glass Cubes, Google Docs, something centralized like that. Yes, no, or I'm not sure. Our second question would be, do you spend more time reviewing the CQM plans written or reviewing progress in achieving its goals through the work plan or other type of roadmap? I've definitely been in the, I spend way more time on the plan than the monitoring progress phase. So again, we have a couple of options there. And then our third question, as our votes come in, did you tie your CQM activities to your component of achieving together activities? And if relevant, the the ending the epidemic activities. And EAG plans are due back to the state this week. Wink, wink.
Wink, wink, wink.
Wink, wink, reminder, reminder.
All right. Trickling in here. I know that these are longer questions.
Right.
But definitely appreciate you taking the time to respond. All right, let's see if we can chase in a couple more. You can do it. We'll get up to 70% again. I have faith in you. And of course, as we've noted in the other polling questions, if you're not sure, it's okay to not be sure. This is a safe space. See if we can chase in two more.
So close.
One more. All right. Let me see. Okay, Tiffany, I see you have a question. Let's end the poll and then I will come back to your question.
Okay, so so Michael's sharing results. It looks like about 44%. So this is kind of an interesting split where some folks do have a central repository. We have almost a quarter of folks who aren't quite sure. So that's a question to follow up on. And maybe that can be an activity that gets implemented for the folks who find out that that doesn't exist, or also for the 8 or so folks, about a third of folks said, no, we don't have that. And it's been interesting. I know some different jurisdictions that have actually done a lot of kind of moving to these spaces, especially since we find ourselves in such a virtual world. So you have colleagues across the country who are kind of having very similar experiences. In terms of spending more time reviewing the CQM plan in its written form versus reviewing progress through the work plan or other attachments, it looks like we have folks who say, about 36% say we look mostly at the plan. 28% where we can look at the plan through the attachments like our capacity building, data collection, and work plan. A handful of folks, just a couple, who don't necessarily spend too much time reviewing with provider organizations, and then 28%, almost a third, who actually aren't quite sure. So as we think about the implementation and the evaluation of the plan, this is kind of another checkpoint. What are we spending our time on, right? It's sort of a feedback loop for how well that's working. And then lastly, about 48% of folks did tie their activities back to a component of achieving together and where may be relevant ending the epidemic. And then we have a handful of folks, around 44%, about 11 respondents, who aren't sure. So again, Michael spoke earlier, we've kind of talked at different points of the presentation. Where can we align? Where can we sort of reference achieving together or ending the epidemic? And where are there parts to bring that and the CQM plan into alignment? And then maybe before we go on, I know there were a couple of pieces in the chat. So Julie did post a few links to some different videos as resources for folks. And it looks like we do have a question from Tiffany. So she writes, on the AA level, she's asking, what's the best strategy to select committee members? Is this picking someone who volunteers and is excited, or focusing on positions to ensure diverse representation? And, hopefully maybe in the toolkit, I don't know, actually, but also a separate question about maybe getting copies of attachment templates that are hopefully usable.
The toolkit doesn't include those templates, but, since that would be a benefit of sending it after the call, we can definitely slip some of those in there for you. Absolutely. There'll be Excel documents that are pre-populated with others' work, just to give you a sense of how you can populate it, and we'll make sure that it's okay from the others, that it's that we may share that with you first, just so that we're not blowing up anyone's spot. As far as the best strategy to select committee members, I think that it's a mixed method, Tiffany, that you want to make sure that you do have solid representation. Diverse is an interesting word, because I don't want to be focused. It doesn't need to be reflective demographically of the diversity of the epidemic, but it does need to be, comprehensive in terms of the makeup of all the different roles, types of roles that you have, and the levels. So you would want to have like 1 or 2 people from top management available, to participate, and you would like to have at least 1 or 2 people who are like super frontline, like concierge level roles. And then everyone else is kind of fits a function within the two, so call center people, billing people, operational people, a data person, things like that.
I do think it's interesting, and Michael had that slide that sort of showed with your different stakeholders, what are sort of the pools that can activate passions. We 100% find ourselves in a space where we've got people interested who are quality champions, and you want to maximize that. And then you've got folks who maybe it is somebody whose position by design is really key to that committee, but they're not necessarily like in it yet, or that passion hasn't been activated. So I think that slide that Michael showed, right, as people facilitating these committees or charged or chairing these committees, what's going to appeal so that I can maximize my people who are enthusiastic and who are already those quality champions. And then how do I activate or foster in those key positions, what's going to motivate that engagement and involvement in the work that we're doing. So I thought that was also a super cool slide that kind of maybe supports you when you find yourself in that space.
Fabulous points. Thanks, Jamie. Well, let's unpack this a little bit and think about, the leadership principles that you have as AAs. And, this is just a quick reminder that the latest DSHS contract components for CQM actually flat out mention both the QM plan. This is taken, or this is kind of paraphrased from the contract writer, but you need to have a QM plan with annual review and update. You need to have annual goals, work plan, and stakeholder involvement, including capacity building, mentioned in your plan. And you need to have a QM committee that meets minimally at a quarterly basis. And you have to have a plan to record and share your minutes. So I think that that's a really important principle that, our state partners at DSHS have already included these as contract components. So it shouldn't be hard to convince people that they need to do this since they signed on the dotted line. This is another thing that's interesting, about the way that we do our work in Texas. And a reminder that, we normally have funder, recipient, and subrecipient, but The subrecipients in the state of Texas for Part B are all of you as the administrative agencies, and that the providers are sub-subrecipients. And we should also keep in mind that at the AA level, this is where we have potentially the blending of funding, where Part A funds come in. And regardless of the type of administrative agency that we have, we may have additional other types of providers, a Part C funded provider or a Part D funded provider in our area. And we may or may not have also funded that provider, using our Part B dollars. So there's a lot to think about in terms of the way that this plays into our service system. And we should think about our service system overall. Of course, we have the most power to affect the parts of the service system that we fund, but we are part of a broader system of care. So it is incumbent on us to take that step back and to think about our role within that broader system of care. Jamie, I think that I was supposed to let you do the last slide.
Yeah, it's okay. Sure. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all good.
I'm like very today.
It's a tag team. It's a tag team effort. But we do want to mention, Michael just talked about, the way things are kind of in Texas and how do we zoom out and keep in mind that we're part of this, coordinated system of care while appreciating the nuances that make, us. And so we also wanted to touch on, AA scale. Keeping in mind that the AAs are responsible for a regional CQM plan that is tied back to that statewide plan and how that regional plan gets evaluated. Also thinking about the different quality committees, again, internal or external CQM committees. And, size and scale and scope are all important. So thinking of the scale of your AA, right? So regions where there is a Part A, they're likely to provide more concrete information or templates or pieces like that for their providers compared to the regions who maybe don't have a Part A. That might be a lot more interaction at the specific agency level versus that sort of systematic utilizing the Part A EMA sort of jurisdiction. And again, just as Michael said, always consider how does my region fit within the overall state system and the overall care of the CQM program.
Jamie.
Yeah.
So primary concerns for your AA CQM infrastructure. Strategic positioning overall. You are an administrative agency that has your own discrete identity, and you are part of an organization, or you may be an organization in and of yourself just by being part of an AA. So it is incumbent on you to think about living and breathing your own institutional values, mission, and vision. But you are funded by the state, so you have to align upwards with the state. That usually isn't something that's too hard. It's just about making sure that you're talking in terms of the lowest common denominator. Another thing that's important to keep in mind here is that you can maintain flexibility in your regional plan to allow for your provider organizations to meaningfully include expectations in their own home plans. So a common error that we have is that, similar to the way that we might say like, the state took all the fun out of this because they've made it so that I have to do something very specific. Well, we can do that same error when we work with our folks in the field, that we might end up taking away their ability to innovate because we've provided too much structure as the AA. So neatly, we're able to think about this in terms of, the golden rule. Do unto my subrecipients as I would have my funder do unto me, right? Maintain that flexibility in your regional plan to allow for them to be them and to do them too. For the CQM plan, include a description or action for all relevant groups. So if you have a planning council, gravy. So what do you do with the planning council? You have EHE in you're an EHE priority 1 jurisdiction, super duper. How does your CQM activities and plan play into that? And you should mention that in your plan. And think about this for all of the different priority initiatives that you have within your region and how CQM and the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program framework can play into that. You want to aim to include consumers and community groups that consumers hail from. So thinking again about You know, sometimes we may be hard pressed due to trauma and the challenges involved in providing services to a population. Well, we don't need to maybe find someone living with HIV who's part of that population, but someone who cares about the HIV positive people among their population. Don't make perfect the enemy of good. Create attachments that are focused on communicating expectations. So this is another thing. We've mentioned attachments and that you can have this one and that one and that one. That's nice. But I think that the most important thing is to think about what you need. What do you need as an administrative agency to clearly communicate to your providers in the field what it is that you're expecting of them, what it is that you're doing all together, and what you think will be the result of those activities. Create only those attachments that will really help you to clearly communicate those goals, and maybe put on the back burner creating additional attachments that you're unclear of whether they'll add value. For the CQM committee, those that overlap with Part A, I think that it's important for you to have an internal and an external CQM committee, because for those of you that are Part A overlapping, you tend to have a lot more, you know, subrecipients and funded activities happening in your service area. Though for your non-Part A overlaps, you may only need an external committee. You should also think about the incredibly vast area that you may be serving, and you might end up creating subcommittees along that line. Sorry that I didn't include that on the slide here, but it'll be caught in the recording at the least. But, you know, again, it's about thinking about how you're set up and how you can do the most good in the most efficient way. All right, and that leads us to our discussion. So I'm wondering, I see that there's been some additional stuff in the chat room. I don't know if there's an overarching sense that anyone wants to provide of, you know, how you feel about CQM infrastructure. Do you have any concerns or questions about how this plays out at the AA level versus the provider level, and how you can provide specific guidance or resources internally to your AA team or externally to the sub-recipients or the providers that you're serving? I'm originally from Indiana, so I can stay quiet for like a year. I know that some of you may have some questions and concerns, and I want to emphasize again, this is a very safe space. I think one of the things I like most about working in clinical quality management and quality improvement is that unlike some of the other aspects of our work and the, you know, the expectations that can have teeth and nails, we don't have that. We have hugs and rainbows. And like it may sound corny, but it's true, because we need to be able to help people understand that this is a low bar, high impact activity that they're a part of, because they're meaningful and unfiltered, unencumbered, you know, participation and perspectives are really what we need most from them. And that's really what we need most from you right now.
So I really liked how you talked about consumer involvement. So some of our areas are really in the rural areas, and they're having some difficulties getting a lot of meaningful consumer involvement. So the way that you talked about, there's other ways to achieve that, right? You can use the planning councils or other committees that are going on to inform your CQM plan if you're unable at the moment to find a group of folks that are consumers that want to participate and that are at the level that would be meaningful for them. In the meanwhile, you can start planning how you might do that by setting up some trainings, things like that, to start sparking involvement until you get to that level where you actually have consumers on your committee. But that doesn't mean you're not meeting the having consumer input checkbox, right? There's other ways to achieve things. Just like the performance measures, we're going to talk more about it coming up in the next session or the final session. But there's a lot of other things you can do besides just quantitative data. You can use qualitative data. You can use staff data, you know, all kinds of things. So I know there's a lot of great work going on across the state, and we have about 12, 13 minutes left. We might end a little early, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Everyone's so quiet this morning. I know we're all so busy and excited to hear that we have a vaccine coming. But please have a little activity going on here, guys.
So I did get a question that came in. Oh, hi, Carla.
Hi.
I'll let you ask your question since you took yourself off mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, so based on what Julie just said, so, and I listened to the whole presentation, and it seems to be a lot of information. But my question goes back to the committee and the presentation that you just made for the AA. So do you think that the people that are actually at the committee understands the whole process? And then also based on what Julie says about the training, do you have any of this flow charted out? So do you find that there's a disconnection between what the committee knows, what the infrastructure is, and is there like a formal flow chart that shows everybody the whole process that will help them make informed decisions with the actual CQM committee and the AA piece, and do we all work together with some type of integral process going forward?
Ooh, I couldn't have planted a better question, my friend. Thank you so much. And Carla is part of the Dallas AA, and we've been doing work with Dallas. And one of the things that we did in Dallas was to help them establish the nuance between their internal and external committees. And so, Carla is asking this question from a perspective of, we've met several times, good, but I think that, kind of embedded in the question is that maybe not all members of the internal committee have a really robust, strong understanding of how all of this is meant to work. And I really value that for so many reasons, Carla, because I think we need to touch back with our adult learning principles, and that we're all adults with a lot going on in our lives. We have, personal lives that beyond what's in our work. And this is just one component of our work. So even if this was something that had our full attention, it may take several times reading through, discussing, or a couple of cycles to really feel confident with it under our belt. And so for that reason, I think that when you're implementing a new internal committee structure or any new structure, it's important to make sure that you're providing, very basic overview type of problems and I guess exercises until people reach that level of confidence, which may take up to a year. And for those of us that are involved in planning councils, that makes sense because we work with people in cyclic fashions all the time. And when we bring people in, there's only so much their hearts and brains can take at a time. And we have to let them go back and digest and come back, and we'll fill them back up again. We'll try not to ever overfill them and overburden or stress them out into thinking ooh, I don't know enough. I can't make a difference. What am I even doing here? This is embarrassing. You know what I mean? So we'll want to make sure that we're never providing too much. But I think that, I don't know if that helps to answer the question, Carla. We do have written out workflows. We do have a written out plan. But I think that it's just exposing people to the information in the process multiple times in a low bar, very collegial way is the way that we're going to end up helping people to truly understand this in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's the whole situation here in Dallas, is that when our CQM committee goes out to the agencies and they work with one person at that agency, and it's like that one person does all of the CQM processes, and they are speaking for the whole entire agency, and it seems like that one person is giving the information to our agency, and we just take it and run with that instead of trying to expand it out like you have in this presentation, that they know that they can work with our CQM committee, that they can work with the AAs. That it needs to be more of a broader, I think in Dallas, a more broader type situation to get it more robust and give them more flow chart and information to get it to be more robust in our city. Yeah.
Ooh, look at you being a plant again. So in February, we're going to be diving deeply into that. You know, how can we use the organizational assessment process and a comprehensive review of the CQM programs, activities, and results to help provide the best information, coaching, and resources in an ongoing way to the subrecipients who are doing all of the important work in the field on the ground. Absolutely. And thank you. Oscar, you are muted, sir. Bingo.
No, I do want to make a quick comment since we have like just 8 minutes, and thank Carla for bringing that up. And I really want to say thank you, Julie, thank you, Janina, because that support going to help us to multiply the concept and understand and separate that CQM, the QI and the QA, they're two different things, but for years, never been kind of like emphasizing that process. Now, since last year, well, we are in Dallas talking about Carla's comment, we are emphasizing that to everybody understand, like Julie always bring that message, CQM is everybody's responsibility, it's everybody's duty, it's everybody's concern, it's everybody's pitch in, but its own division, its own department has to understand that bringing that is solidifying the concept about CQM. And if you have the process over years, it's very difficult to erase that memory and reset basically the concept. But that's why I applaud your administration, from Julie, from Janina, from the whole staff, from Rhonda, being Rhonda here, which is your main solutions, that help us to clarify that. And it is one of the big tasks for us training Dallas EMA, because at the subrecipient level, they are not used to that. We are actually training them how to trust us. The data we are sharing, everybody's data, and we are showing data that it's like a little icky. They are bringing us and help us to solidify that concept. Thanks so much for that, and I appreciate that from the state perspective, your support.
Yay, thanks, Oscar.
Thank you. And of course, Michael and Jamie, hey, that's a team.
We have had some questions about, what are some innovative or best practices to engage our planning councils in quality management. So I know from experience, a couple of things that I've done in my work was make sure that I coordinate with my planning council's assessment subcommittee. So they're the folks who look at the data and look at the service standards and pieces like that. And I would do quarterly, I would be on their work plan to report out from the quality advisory. So the Part A's quality advisory committee, I would make sure that that was, basically the month following when we met, I would provide an update just as to what happened and how that went. And then for the Planning Council's community-based subcommittee was the Community Advocacy Committee. I would do at least twice a year a biannual quality update. And for that, I would share with folks example QI projects. And I would actually report on, what's going on and what are the things that the different clinical and non-clinical agencies are looking at. And that was an opportunity to share successes, to share lessons learned. And then that's kind of at the subcommittee level. For the Planning Council, at large, I would do like 2 trainings or 2 presentations annually. One of them in relationship to the sort of priority setting, allocation, prioritization schedule before that would get started. And then a second one I would do maybe more like around January or something like that, kind of once every 6 months. And it would be some sort of, QI fundamental, QI introduction, just something to get people using the same language to increase, numeracy, comfortability. And I would borrow a lot from, CQII, formerly NQC, a lot of games, again, really implement adult learning for your visual people, your tactile people. But I would just make sure to get on their different work plans and hit it up at the subcommittee and also the Planning Council at large calendar.
I think that that is so important because, you know, and thank you for that question, because it definitely gets at the mechanics. Good, I understand that I'm supposed to communicate and share, but how does that work? What does that look like? You know, so as you're thinking about this, if there are additional questions or concerns about how to make that happen, we will definitely be interested in that perspective as well. We have 3 minutes remaining, or 2 minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions that you want to raise as it relates to CQM infrastructure. I'm glad you like that too, David. Great. Well, while we're waiting to see if there's any other pieces, and thank you for that. Thank you for that comment in the chat room too, Julie. We of course have one more poll that is our evaluation. So just take a moment to respond to this. Just as a reminder, Germain Solutions and Julie's team and Janina meet after each of these, so that we're able to look at how we can, you know, change up the way that we're doing these sessions. We want to make sure that we're providing you with something that is useful and impactful and timely. So please, please, please let us know whether or not we've hit that mark for you. And I'll leave this open to see if folks can respond. It would be great if we could get 70% again. And of course, while we're collecting our evaluation responses, any other points? And yes, that's actually a good point. Julie, I know that we are disseminating the toolkits via email, and we're doing the YouTube channel for the recording. I'm not sure if there are if there's a place where we're saving these documents as well, or if we want to just refer people to email for now. Oh, you muted. Bingo.
Julie, you're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, again. So no, we don't have a specific centralized spot yet, but we are working on it actively. So we'll stick with emails for now, but it is in our plans to get a sign up. We have a lot of our quality assurance stuff, and I really don't want to put it there because I'm still, you know, we really want to keep this separated. So.
And yeah, so to that end, Jamie, if you can put your email in the chat room as well, that way folks can reach out to either of us. This will also be caught in the recording. It's michaelhagernyc@gmail.com. If you'd like to receive anything that you think is missing, don't hesitate. Just give me a poke and I'll send it to you. And there's Jamie's, jamie.r.shank@gmail.com. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to respond to our polls and to join us today. This has been an incredible discussion, and I'm so grateful for your time. I don't know, Jamie, if there's any words of closing, or if Julie or Janina, words of closing on your side, your end.
I just want to say thanks for the shared discussion today, and really excited to bring these sessions to the team. Thanks.
Yeah, same here. Thanks, guys. We're really building this momentum. Let's keep it up. I'm excited. We're doing, and you're doing great work. So thank you for joining us and spending your time with us this morning.
Great. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.